A surprising announcement moments ago. Afghanistan says it will sign an agreement that allows 10,000 U.S. troops to stay in that country beyond the deadline the White House had wanted, which is the end of this year. Senior White House advisor John Podesta, traveling, says the deal will be signed tomorrow in Kabul. Pete Hegseth, the CEO of Concerned Veterans for America and a Fox News contributor. Pete, good morning to you. You were in Afghanistan last, what, 2 years ago, 2012? Is that right?
Yep, absolutely, 2011, 2012.
So what do you think of this move now?
This is a very important move. This is a recognition that the investments that we've made in Afghanistan, if we don't stand by with the residual force, they could go in the wrong direction. And I saw that when I was there. The Taliban remains very strong in the countryside. A lot of pressure on the Afghan army. This is an important move to consolidate military and diplomatic gains. You know what this is, Bill? This is a tacit acknowledgement from this administration that whether they say they've learned the lessons of Iraq or not, that they have, that the going to zero in Iraq did not work. They're going to have a residual force of 10,000 in Afghanistan. This is not ending the war. This is following through properly, and hopefully will stand beside a new Afghan government. They just elected a new president and chief executive, hopefully a new chapter in Afghanistan, and we're there to stand to maintain stability.
The point in this, Pete, is that you saw what ISIS did in Syria, and you have seen what ISIS has done in Iraq, and left unchecked what would happen in Afghanistan. And this administration cannot afford to take that chance. So you classify this now as a lesson learned?
Absolutely I classify this as a lesson learned, because while Afghanistan was always the good war for President Obama, he also talked about ending it. And ending it in Iraq meant going to zero. So why wouldn't we believe that ending it in Afghanistan would mean going to zero? They looked at the rise of ISIS in Iraq and have realized that the Taliban is no lesser of a threat. And anyone following what's going on in Afghanistan today sees that they remain a robust force, a very real threat. And if we did not provide a residual force politically and militarily, we would start to lose control of that area, and we might be drawn back in even more, which is what nobody wants. So
it's a striking thing when you're building this coalition of European partners, how Iraq suddenly has become the good war again. It's stunning. We had Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday with Tony Blinken, the Deputy National Security Advisor. And what Wallace had offered was, a year ago, the president said, we're ending these wars. After 10 years of war, there will be no more for the United States. Here's that exchange. Watch.
How could the president have been so wrong?
The president was exactly right. What we're doing is totally different than the last decade. We're not sending hundreds of thousands of American troops back into Iraq or Afghanistan or anywhere else. We're not going to be sending trillions of American dollars. What we're doing is supporting local forces with some of our unique assets, air power, training and equipping them, assisting them, intelligence. They will be doing the fighting on the ground. We can't want it more than they do.
So what the administration is going to argue, Pete, if you don't put troops on the ground, of which there are about 1,600 to 2,000 already in Iraq, if you don't do that, we are not fighting the same wars that George Bush fought. Is that defense going to fly?
It's not going to fly, because they are fighting the same war that George Bush fought. This is a fight that was there before 9/11, after 9/11, before Iraq or after Iraq. These are radical Islamists who seek to export their view of this world as far and wide as they can. They tried in Afghanistan before 9/11. They tried in Iraq after our policy wasn't working in 05-06, and now they've exploited us leaving in Syria and Iraq. Whether we decide to defeat it or not is our choice. Now, they're taking a very different approach, and if we can work with local partners, that is always preferred to large amounts of U.S. boots on the ground. The question is whether these words they use, like the decimation of al-Qaeda or the destruction of ISIS, matched with the tools, whether or not those match the tools they're bringing to bear, whether the Iraqi army and the Peshmerga and this Free Syrian Army can really do it. That's a huge open question, Bill. And so whether or not he's willing to follow through is what's at issue. So you see this rhetorical incoherence. We're at war, we're not at war. We've got a status force agreement, we don't. Boots on the ground, no boots on the ground. We want to repeal the AUMF, the authorization of use of military force, but we're going to use it for justification. That tap dancing rhetorically is not a helpful way to build a coalition or build support behind your side. So they're going to have to pick one way or another whether we're going to take these guys on and beat them.
One last thing. I've heard you talk about a stubborn adherence. What do you mean by that?
So you know what? First they were indifferent on foreign policy because they were domestically focused, remaking America. But you know what? They've remained stubbornly adherent to the belief that America is the problem, that our presence is what breeds instability. He said it in speeches. It's effectively the manifestation of this blame America first idea. So when problems arise, whether it's Libya, Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, the Ukraine, Gaza, they take an American minimalist approach. And I think the lesson of the last 6 years is that leading from behind breeds even more chaos and more instability, yet they remain adherent to that viewpoint. We'll see whether or not they change course in Iraq and Afghanistan.
All right. Pete, thanks. Pete Hegseth in Washington, D.C. today. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Bill.